We are back with another digital edition of Talking Politics and what is arguably the biggest, maybe the most interesting race in the state right now, the contest for Massachusetts Secretary of State. It is a role that incumbent Bill Galvin has held for nearly 3 decades. But last month, another Democrat won the party's endorsement, NAACP Boston President Tanisha Sullivan, who joins me now with less than 2 months to go until she and Galvin face off in the primary. Tanisha, thank you for being here.
Thank you so much.
You, I believe, have not run for elected office before, even though you've been in the political fray for quite a while. What's it like running statewide?
It's wonderful. You know, I really do consider it just a great opportunity to connect with my fellow Bay Staters across Massachusetts. I'm seeing and experiencing certainly the great commonalities that we have as it relates to hope and belief, but I'm also having an opportunity to see up close, you know, many of the common challenges that we're experiencing here in Massachusetts.
Have you learned anything about the state in the course of traversing it that you didn't know before? Or has your perspective about Massachusetts changed in any way?
I think it's important for us to really understand just how much of a crisis we're in as it relates to housing, just how much of a crisis we're in as it relates to food insecurity. You know, here in Massachusetts, many people enjoy the benefits of the economic prosperity that the Commonwealth has experienced. And I think it can be easy for some not to see and understand that there are far too many families and individuals in Massachusetts who are struggling just to have basic economic needs met. It's a real crisis.
Are those areas in which even tangentially you think you could have an impact as Secretary of State? Because to my mind, they're sort of more the kind of thing that maybe the governor would work on, the legislature. But could you work on those if you win?
I think that every constitutional office, and this is one of them, has a role to play in helping Massachusetts tackle the real issues that are impacting families every day. And so, you know, at a very basic level, you know, the role of the Secretary of State as the Chief Elections Officer, I believe, needs to transform into one that is more proactive and engaged, working to tackle the tough issue of low voter participation here in Massachusetts, right? Because who votes determines who gets elected, and the people who get elected do have an outsized voice in the policies that are experienced by everyday people. The policies like, you know, what grant funding might be available in a local community to help support a local food bank, for example, right? The policies as it relates to whether a moratorium on utility bills is going to be extended or not. And so from the Secretary of State's seat, I do see the need for the office to take a more active role in helping people, helping to not only break down administrative barriers to the ballot box, but also really helping people in communities be more inspired, encouraged, and motivated to actually cast that ballot. That's directly. But the other piece is, I do see in other aspects of this office ways that the Secretary of State's office can be more proactive, can take a larger interest in helping to address some of these challenges. So for example, you know, when I think about the Secretary of State as the Chief Corporations Officer, so to speak, you know, this is the office that you have to go through if you want to start a business here in Massachusetts. It's where businesses are registered, where they pay annual fees. Historically, this has been thought of as very transactional and administrative, ministerial even to some extent. What we know is that the small businesses are truly the backbone of our economy. Small businesses, especially the micro Main Street businesses, hire local people. They help to increase public safety. They help to strengthen community writ large. And what we have right now in Massachusetts, you know, as a result, in many instances because of the COVID-19 pandemic, is a struggling small business community. I believe that the Secretary of of State's office can play a more active role in helping to connect our micro small business communities to the resources they need in order to be successful, the resources they need, the technical supports they need to not just stay in business, but to grow their businesses, to be able to hire more people, to be able to offer comprehensive benefit packages. And those are things that the Secretary of State's office could be doing today.
Let's talk about voting rights for a
Okay.
little bit. In your convention speech, you said, and I expect you've been saying this on the trail too, that Massachusetts is lagging rather than leading when it comes to voting rights.
Yes.
You pointed in that speech to Maine adopting same-day voting registration right about 50 years ago. As you know, Bill Galvin filed a bill last year that would have made same-day voter registration a reality in Massachusetts, and the legislature decided not to do it. What would you have done to change legislative hearts and minds that Bill Galvin didn't do?
What I know from the work that I've done in community, really helping to advance public policy into law that impacts the lives of people, is that it's not enough to simply file legislation or to draft policy and then leave it to someone else to get it done. When you really believe in something, you fight for it, you stand by it, you advocate for it. And so what people can expect of me as a Secretary of State, someone who comes to this role with 20 years of legal experience, someone who comes to this role as an advocate, a civil rights leader, is that when we are facing, when we have before us an opportunity to advance a voting right like same-day voter registration, I'm not just going to file legislation and leave it to the legislature to get it done. I'm going to be in there working right alongside our legislators and our voting rights community and other stakeholders to help us get it across the finish line. What's concerning to me, I think it is an unfortunate example of how Massachusetts is lagging, is that Maine did adopt same-day voter registration in 1973. Since that time, 20 other states have adopted some form of same-day voter registration. And here, including our sister New England states, by the way. But here in Massachusetts, time and time again, decade after decade, we miss the opportunity. The impact of that, the way that plays out in community, is persistent voter participation gaps. Massachusetts experiences very low voter participation rates. Even in 2020, when we hit a peak of voter participation of about 76%, when you start to disaggregate the data, what we find is that communities of color, working people, folks experiencing poverty, still had some of the lowest voter participation rates. And arguably, those are the communities that are most impacted by who gets elected. And what the data tells us is that same-day voter registration or election day voter registration actually helps to increase voter participation. This is one of the most important voting rights, voting flexibilities that we here in Massachusetts could enact that would actually help us tackle our low voter participation rates.
You have also called Massachusetts the least transparent state in the country. How would you change that as Secretary of State?
Well, it's not me. It is what has borne out, unfortunately, here in the birthplace of our democracy. We have found ourselves in 2022 the only state in the country that exempts at the state level all three branches of government:
Yep.
the legislature, the executive, and the judiciary. Which means, right, in layman's terms, that public policy is not debated in the public square. It is discussed, debated, decided oftentimes outside of the view of the public. I happen to believe that that the American democracy works best when the people have an opportunity to participate. And in order for us to be able to participate, we need access to information.
So what can be done? I mean, I'd love to have public records access to stuff from the governor's office, the executive as a whole, the legislature, the courts.
Yeah.
What does it take to make that happen?
I think we've got to do a few things. One, certainly with the existing public records law, I think that the Secretary of State's office needs to take a more active role in ensuring that when public information requests come in, that the fees and the red tape that community-based organizations or even journalists have to experience are reduced and or eliminated.
Okay.
I think that's really important because those are barriers to access, and that's a right now solution. I think in addition, the current law really gives the enforcement authority to the Attorney General's office. There's got to be better relationship and coordination between the Secretary of State's office and the Attorney General's office. It's critically important that the Secretary of State's office is not operating on an island of its own as it relates to anything in our government, and that the Secretary of State's office is a good partner to the other constitutional offices. So that is something that I would change day one. But then the other piece is the larger issue. And I do think we need to revisit our current law. I believe that we should begin with a belief that public information actually belongs to the public. And when there is a need for an exemption, that it is narrowly tailored for a specific purpose.
What's the nudge that makes them say, yeah, that's a good idea?
I mean, I think, again, in my experience working with some of these sticky issues, coming around the table with some common values and principles, I think is really important. Oftentimes when folks are kind of caught in the emotion or caught in too passionate about a particular issue, they want to jump right in, and we get into those being more positional. I believe when it comes to the sticky issues like this one is and will continue to be, it's important to come to the table with some shared values and principles. Here again, I believe that there's a pathway to greater transparency. I do believe that our state legislature, filled with outstanding public servants, wants to be transparent. Now, how we get to greater transparency likely will be a longer journey. But can we come to the table with the belief that that public information belongs to the public? Can we come to the table with the belief that if people have more access to information, that they might actually be more inclined to help us advance various policy positions? Can we come to some agreement that in order to increase civic participation, which strengthens our communities, right? In order to increase civic engagement and participation, people need access to more information. I'm committed to doing my part in order to move this forward. I think it needs to be a really important priority for our democracy, for the viability of our democracy. And so it's something that I'm willing to, again, kind of go through the process with our legislature on.
Tanisha Sullivan, thank you. Really good to talk to you.
Thank you so much. Great to be here.
We'll be back throughout the summer on youtube.com/GBH News with the big political news you need to know about. And we'll be back on TV on Friday, September 9th. Please mark your calendars and join us.